Hi, I'm Steve Wolf, and welcome back to The Fire Break, sponsored by Team Wildfire. We are joined today by Anthony Schultz of Esri. And everyone knows it at Esri because we don't know what it stands for, but apparently I just learned it stands for the Environmental Science Research Institute. And basically, if you make maps, if you fight fires, if you do anything, you're using data from Esri. You probably just didn't know it. Uh, Anthony, welcome to the podcast, and tell me a little bit about what Esri does and what you do.
Yeah, so at Esri, and like Steve mentioned, we are the Environmental Systems Research Institute, and we are involved in all things mapping, GIS, location intelligence, data analytics, all of which play a heavy role across a variety of sectors, including wild and fire, right? And so what we do is we really try to focus on bringing a lot of the data analytics and a lot of your data, plotting it on a map so people can easily understand it, maybe
Okay.
connect or make some relationships that are typically hard to see when you just see them on let's say, a normal spreadsheet, a CSV, right? Plot those values on a map and be able to start drawing relationships between all of those seemingly disparate points. We work heavily in data visualization. A lot of people know us for our dashboards, especially during COVID, the John Hopkins dashboards, some of those things, allowing the public to come in and interrogate that data a little bit more meaningfully. Our customer base spans the entire globe. We've got well over 300,000 organizations
Wow.
using our platform, ArcGIS. And among those, most emergency management agencies, every state, every federal agency involved in wildfire, also some of our customers. Namely, while it's not an agency, NIFC uses our platform to collect data in the field, to visualize that, and really create a common operating picture of the entire wire operating environment. So
So
that's
do
what
the
we do
people
at
who
Esri.
are that's a ton. So do the people who are using your services know you as Esri, or do they know you by different product names?
That's actually a funny story. So it used to be ESRI, right? It was abbreviated, and I think over time, folks just colloquially called it Esri, and so now Jack, our owner and CEO, just kind of shortened and said, "Fine, we'll give in to the user speak and colloquialisms, and now we're just known as Esri, ESRI, Esri."
Okay. And what are your products? Like if a fire team is using an Esri product, what's that product called?
Yeah, so if you're in the field, right, you're going to be using field maps, ArcGIS field maps. That's a
Field
map
maps?
forward field maps. Yeah, that's a map forward data collection tool. It allows
Okay.
firefighters to get out into the environment, take a look on a map, right, on their device, and start saying, okay, I'm located right here at this point, and I can see my bulldozer putting in line over on this point, right? So you have the ability to collect all of these suppression features. So you push a button on the map, and you start collecting, okay, if I'm a dozer boss, walking a dozer to suppress a fire, I can see the tracks for where that dozer's been. If I'm a hand crew, uh, putting in defensible space around a home, we're collecting data on all of that. So firefighters have multiple points of entry on this application depending on what style of suppression action they're taking to really start populating that map. Once all of that data is in there, you've got 5,000 people kind of contributing to a common map. The
Right.
incident commanders back at the incident command post are able to then visualize that all in real time. That happens in a disconnected environment. All of that information is stored locally. And then once a firefighter hits connectivity, or maybe they stop at the local gas station, right, to grab a snack for lunch, they hit that Wi-Fi. All of that data then pushes and syncs to that common map, right, so that everyone on the fire is operating from the same sheet of music. If you're an organization that has suppression responsibilities, say like the U.S. Forest Service, the BLM, you might be using it to make your risk maps, your preparedness maps, plotting where fuels work and risk mitigation work needs to be done. So there's a whole bunch of different uses, and it just depends on where you're at within that fire response hierarchy, whether that's pre-fire, active fire, post-fire, determine really what it is you're going to be doing. But ArcGIS is a suite of projects. The flagship is going to be ArcGIS Pro. It's a very powerful desktop-based location sharing map making tool, allowing you to gain insight into suitability modeling for those fuels treatments we mentioned, all the way to plotting the big fire maps, right, that you see printed off for instance. So where you're at is going to depend where it is that you're going to be leveraging our system, whether that's the point of entry being that firefighter, or if you're on the back end trying to make those maps and do the data analytics.
How do you bridge the gap between people who write software and people who handle hoses?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
a good question. So
right,
at
right.
Esri,
The
yeah,
usability thing is right. What this always comes down to.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's why Esri hires my position, right? So I speak a lot of fire guy and enough nerd that I can try to make that translation, right? Um, I've been in that seat. I used to run the fire program for the state of Wyoming. I was the state of Wyoming FMO. And during my time, you get familiar and exposed to all the business needs that you have, either from a boots on the ground perspective, or maybe your state forester testifying in front of legislature, defending budgets and some of the actions you're taking within an organization. So I speak both of those worlds, and enough on the tech where I can help bridge that gap. So Esri would hire me to try to make those translations between what the guys need in the field and how we're going to create or meet those needs as a tech company.
So, okay, so you get a chance to take a look at a ton of data,
Yeah, yeah.
coming through. Does anything pop out to you as like something that we could do to reduce the occurrence of wildfires?
Yeah, a good first step in understanding and how to reduce the occurrence of wildfires is just going to be gaining an understanding of where these fires are occurring in the first place, right? Again, it's a spatial relationship. Everything happens someplace, right? And so,
I think so.
yeah, that's right. And so being able to plot those with, just a simple lat long on a map, and we can start visualizing, or maybe we're going to create a heat map, no pun intended, of where exactly all of these fires are starting. We're going to
Okay.
find likely that a lot of these fires might start along road systems, for instance, right? And so maybe we need to target a lot of our fuels treatments along those road systems. So that's a good first step. And then what we're also seeing is the democratization of some of that data. And so NIFC, the National Interagency Fire Center, collects all of the fire records from state and local jurisdictions as well as across all of the federal agencies. They make all of that data available to the public, to other agencies for download through what's called the NIFC Open Data Site. Right? And so from there, you can download fire perimeters, you can download all those starts and start doing that kind of analysis for your area of interest, whether that's maybe a community is creating a community wildfire plan, right? And they want to know where the fires are already occurring within their area of interest, or you're a state program manager looking at exactly what you're doing, right? Trying to understand where those fires are occurring. Once you've got a good sense, I think, of where those fires are actually occurring, it then comes time to start crafting some sort of prevention or mitigation plan against that, right? To lower that occurrence. If they're happening in low income communities, maybe there's some prevention or outreach efforts that might help to fix that, right? If it's trash burning, there could be education programs. So there's a wide variety of tools available to fire practitioners to start engaging in meaningful prevention and mitigation work, but a lot of that hinges on understanding where those fires are occurring first.
It sounds very similar to law enforcement. Well, we want to stop the robberies. Okay, let's keep an eye on the banks and the liquor stores. Right?
That's
Once we
exactly
know
right.
where the problems are happening, right, then we can focus the resources in the right place.
That's right. It doesn't do very much good to go out and be standing in a 3-acre concrete lot in Walmart preaching the values of fire prevention and mitigations.
I mean, like, if you don't want to burn, that's a good place to be.
That's right.
So by understanding where the fires are, we understand how to focus the resources. And what about the impact? What have you learned about what we could do once a fire starts? How can we reduce the impact of that fire?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a bit of a loaded one to unpack, and I mean that in the sense that a lot of the impacts that occur from fire, mitigating those happens pre-fire, right? A lot of folks, public included, when I as a firefighter go out and let's take a structure triage. We have a fire burning towards maybe a little mountain community, and as a firefighter, I'm tasked to go out and take stock of maybe the defensibility of each one of these structures. You're going to have some that are really good. Homeowner's responsibility has kicked in, and that individual's mitigated on the property. They've got things limbed up to 6 feet, no burnables next to the home, that kind of thing. Right? Fine, basic firewise principles. And inevitably, you're going to have others that maybe haven't been as proactive over the last 20 years or so, right? And so what they're expecting is for that fire crew to come in and do really 20 years worth of work in maybe the few hours they have before a fire impinges upon that property, right? And that's not feasible.
They want a miracle worked, right?
And we're not miracle workers, right? I think we do a really bad job in the fire service of kind of promoting that message. Hey, we can fix it, do more with less, that kind of attitude. And really, ultimately, in that specific scenario, you're going to fail or not be as successful as you could have been if we're promoting homeowner responsibility and state and local engagement at that pre-fire stage, right? So it's all about making sure that you have landscape scale risk reduction treatments out ahead of these communities. It's about making sure that homeowners understand the right actions to take and are able to operationalize those actions to safeguard their homes prior to a fire start. Now, once that fire starts, it's game on, right? Smoke's in the air. So
Yeah.
we have a lot of fire spread modeling capabilities, not necessarily at Esri. We provide a tech that allows that kind of activity to occur, right? So if you're
Okay.
an agency looking to do fire spread modeling, you might go with a Technosilva, for instance, right? And they currently provide all of the modeling for all the large power companies on the West Coast. They provide it for Cal Fire's Intel. And so once that fire starts, we run propagation or spread modeling on that fire. And we want to gain an understanding of where that fire is headed, and then what is the impact look like to not just citizens, but critical infrastructure. If you're concerned about the environment, maybe we're looking at watersheds. It might be wildfire or wildlife issues at play, right? The spotted owl comes to mind, or insert endangered species. So getting an associated impact report for every fire start would be an awesome kind of idyllic world, because it allows us to understand what that impact's truly going to be. And if it is going to be that citizen base or threatening population centers, then it allows us as fire managers to kind of get in the mindset of, okay, here's what we need to respond with, here's why, and it'll be likely a so much stronger kind of initial response to that fire ignition.
Okay, so you're coming up with what your values at risk are, and then you're allowing, humans to go in and order that list for you.
Yep.
Right.
Yep,
Okay.
that's all it is.
There's spotted owls. There's this community of 100 homes, and there's a nuclear power plant.
Yep.
What do you want to protect first? Because we only got so many trucks and so many planes, right?
Yep. 100%. It's basically triage at time of ignition for what we want to spot. And we've even got agencies. We released a blog about this, but we've got agencies primarily. I think this came out of the Rocky Mountain Research Center, but it's called PODS, Potential Operational Delineations, and it's basically saying, okay, we're going to break up this entire forested area into these pods, right? And we're going to define where our greatest chances of success are going to be within this 250,000 acre swath, or this maybe 10,000 acre swath, right? What control lines are we already going to have available to us? And some of them might be natural, some of them might be man-made in the form of some of those maybe fuels mitigation work that we had talked about that had been done prior. And then what does the response need to look like when a fire starts in each one of these kind of acreage or these boundaries, right? Think of it as a geospatial bucket of where to put all of your data so that we kind of know ahead of time through that iterative scenario planning what our reaction is going to be to a start in that particular area. In some cases, we might not even need to do anything.
You might not be what?
We might not need to have a response at all, right? We're going to sit and monitor
Right.
it. If it's
Nothing's threatened, and it's just nature reducing its fuel load, and let her go.
Yep, 100%.
So of all of the ways you've got of gathering data and interpreting the data, what are the technologies that have come to the forefront recently that have been game changing?
Yeah, so I think probably the first one that comes to mind, and not to have a shameless Esri plug here, but when NIFC moved to what we're calling the NIFC org, it's their implementation of our SaaS product, our GSR Online, and then put the data collection tools, Survey 123, Quick Capture, field maps into the hands of those field operators, those firefighters. It really revolutionized the way that we're collecting data and visualizing a common operating picture, because we hadn't had that capability before, right? You've got 30,000 wildland firefighters operating off the same sheet of music. That's a bit of a beautiful thing. After that, from data collection, what really excites me is some of the capabilities around satellite imagery, drones, that kind of thing. The satellite imagery piece, we're doing everything from data collection before fire, but a good one during active fire scenario is going to be, let's say, damage assessments, right? We're taking what would have traditionally been, you think 2018 in the Camp Fire, a multi-week process to go manually door to door and assess each one of these properties for damage. Now, that's still a process that has to happen. We want to ground truth all of that, but we're moving in a direction where we're speeding up the actual product that can get delivered as a result of some of those efforts. So fire occurs. As soon as we get a window, we take a picture of the area that's impacted, and we're able to run that imagery through a model and then give agencies a 95 to 98% accurate damage assessment within hours.
Wow.
I mean, it's fantastic.
Wow.
I mean, we're to the point now where you can sit there and task that picture from your cell phone. It's pretty cool capability. So that's probably some of the neater things that
So
gets me excited.
so almost as fast as you could say how many acres are involved, you could say how many dollars of losses have occurred.
Pretty close. Depending on the
Right there,
activity, I
because
wouldn't go that far, but yeah, we're getting dang close to that.
you're getting close though,
Yeah,
right?
and
So
what's really exciting, Steve, is that it takes it from what's essentially a recovery product and it makes it operational because of the speed at which we're delivering it, right? And so, say you need FEMA urban search and rescue on site for some sort of urban conflagration scenario. You're able to then tell those folks, hey, here's the map, here's the damage assessments already lined out, or our best guess at where you need to start putting crews on the ground and start digging in and doing their work, kind of thing. So it's really kind of a neat implementation or rather example of that tech.
Anthony, you're obviously extremely passionate about this, which I love because I don't think anything gets done by people who aren't passionate about their work. So, what was the point in your career or in your growing up where you realized, what your path forward was going to be that brought you here?
Yeah, so, uh, well, I won't lie to you, Steve. I went to school to be a cop, right? And so I know I'm going to get beat about the
Yeah,
head and shoulders from all the fire guys that watch this, but
sure.
uh,
Cop, firefighter, it's all the same thing.
that's right. Yeah, so went to school to be a cop. Ended up joining the volunteer fire department, right? And really, really enjoyed it. And as a volunteer fire department in Manhattan, Kansas, most of our calls are rural, right? And meaning that they're going to be grass fires, wildfires of different natures. And so getting out, getting embedded with other volunteer fire departments and being able to respond to those calls kind of got the bug in me. And when I
Yeah.
graduated, oh man, I applied to something like 400 jobs through USA Jobs. The seasonal firefighter life at the time wasn't the greatest, and so the shotgun and naps everywhere. Got 2 calls back out of that, and started with the National Park Service at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, where I was on the engine, right? And then from there, it just snowballed. So I was able to move around, and we call it fire tourism. So you're never anchored necessarily to one spot, but once you're in the feds, you can easily migrate between agencies. So I worked for the National Park Service to start. I went over to Utah, was working for the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, for a while. Worked for Fish and Wildlife during the winters, doing prescribed
Wow.
fire, doing clear cutting, that kind of thing on some of our units. And then in the summers would jump back to either one of those other agencies to do suppression work. Um,
So you
at the
really got a
time,
lot of time in with all of the
yeah,
agencies that are currently your clients, right?
yeah, it was great. And then ended up, most recently was the Assistant State Forester Fire Management Officer for the state of Wyoming. Did that about 6 years. And it's awesome, right? Because you get all of the tools, right? I'm running the desk now, but you get all the tools at your disposal that you get in to play with, right? So the helicopters, the fire
Sure.
engines, you get to interact with the firefighters on the ground. And so that's really the attractive part of it. But then, you're also the dope that gets to go to state legislature and tell them why you spend all their money, why things are so expensive, why more money in the suppression account, right? So you get to do that too. But so it was a really good bout of experience there. And then I remember taking a GIS course. I want to say, and probably 12 years ago at this point, right when I was
Okay.
starting out, led by Chris Ferner. And she had, at the time, was still looking for Esri as our wildfire specialist. And I'm like, man, if I could work for one tech company, I know it would be Esri, right? Because it's kind of neat work, and
And
it's
is that
neat.
because of Esri or because Chris was there?
It's both. Yeah, she's awesome to work with. Many of the folks that are going to watch this are going to know Fern probably, but and it's because of the work that they were doing, right? It just seems like a really cool mission. And so, fast forward that next 10, 12 years, and here I am today. So it's been a kind of a neat way to go full circle, working for agencies and
Yeah.
then end up with Esri.
And that was actually the next question I was going to ask you, Anthony, is, was there a single individual whose mentorship or encouragement, helped you end up where you are now?
Yeah, Fern would probably be a big one. As far as firefighting goes in general, when you make that transition from being an operator to being more of in leadership, uh, it takes a little bit more adjustment. And so I've had several state foresters over my career really kind of take me under their wing and be a mentor, not just from a leadership perspective, but also deal with your lack of operation at that point. Now you're doing budgets and you're doing the stuff that makes
Right.
all of their lives better, but you're just not necessarily doing it on the ground, right? So I've had plenty of mentors at both the public safety and state forestry level that have helped me along.
Wonderful. Well, so like in any job, there's parts of it you like, parts of it you don't like, parts of it you just have to do,
Yeah.
parts that you love. Um, of what you've gotten to do so far, what do you think has been the most impactful project that you've got to work on in terms of wildfire mitigation?
Impactful,
Yeah, like
um,
where do you feel like what you did made the biggest difference?
yeah. So for the Uber fire nerds out there, there's a program called IROC. And before that, it was ROS, right? Resource Ordering Capability. I can't remember what it was. It doesn't matter. Anyhow,
Yep.
it's the Wildfires dispatch system. And it's how we move resources from fire to fire or from program to program during times of fire occurrence. And there's a bunch of ways to get mobilized that I was ignorant to when I was working at the federal level, right? You jump stateside, it's a complete set of uh, authorizing laws and capabilities and just it's a different network, right, that you're utilizing to move resources at times. And those are called compacts. And I was at a meeting just this last week in Florida. It's called Chairs, Managers, Supervisors. Every other year,
Say that a little slower, sorry.
chairs, managers, and supervisors. It's chartered under the
Okay.
National Association of State Foresters. And every year, all 50 fire management officers or their equivalent, their chairs, managers, supervisors, get together and have a meeting. They discuss issues going on in the wildfire response community, how we can better trade resources, what does the fire landscape look like 3 years from now, where do we want to be in 10 years as a community, right? And so all of the states get together, they kind of define these sets of rules, and then they start to implement those on their own at the state level, right? Kind of herding cats and pulling all 50 states the same direction is the hope there, right? And
Right.
had the opportunity a few years back to write the requirements for what's now a compact module in IROC. It sounds lame, but it was a lot of data requirements and mapping out of how information needs to flow, that kind of thing. But that is now in actual production today, and states are moving resources even to Canada
Wow.
outside of kind of that federal or interagency system, and able to do that on their own authority. So we spec'd out all of the requirements for that kind of resource movement, and here we are today actually getting to implement that stuff, right? That was an 8-year project, but
Oh, how
so
satisfying.
yeah, it's really satisfying to see some of that stuff actually cross the finish line.
Yeah, right, right. Well, I would imagine that with the number of people that you work with, you come across just such a divergent number of beliefs about fire, wildfire mitigation,
Yeah.
what we should do, what we shouldn't do. Um, and some of those are probably, 100% wrong. Of the beliefs that you've heard, is who was it? Um, Samuel, what's the guy's name who wrote Huck Finn and
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain?
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Right, right, right. He said it isn't the things that you know that hurt you that you don't know that hurt you. It's the things that you know that aren't so.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So long way of saying, what are the most commonly held beliefs that are incorrect that are making it harder to get wildfire under control?
I think we touched on one a little earlier, Steve, and that would be the perception that we can end the fire problem, right, with more suppression resources or more funding to that area. To me, that's just a big band-aid, right? When we start buying and
Yeah.
talking about, hey, we're going to invest more money into our suppression programs, that is not to say that that's not important. It is a worthwhile investment that needs to continue to occur, and they need to see increased levels of funding. But what isn't as prevalent in the discussion is that investment on the pre-fire side, right? Investing in the actual mitigation programs that are going to have an impact on the landscape. The best way to stop fire is making sure it doesn't start in those unwanted areas. And so
Right.
seeing investments made in that area is fantastic. And the reason I mention that is because it goes back to that idea of homeowner responsibility or maybe elected official perception that with those suppression resources, we're going to be able to stop every fire. And that's just not the case. I mean, over the past, 5-6 years, we're seeing that landscape change a little bit. And we're kind of getting a rude awakening with fires like the Camp Fire, the Marshall Fire,
Yep.
Lahaina, right? We can start naming all these urban conflagrations where we lose thousands of structures and sometimes human life. So if I had one misconception that I could correct, I think, whether it's in the fire industry or out of it, it would be that we can handle it all. It takes a large interagency network. It takes untraditional partners or maybe partners that you don't see as traditionally contributing to the space. hearing
Yep.
their ideas, incorporating those ideas, and really getting work and funding into that pre-fire area.
Yeah, it sounds like that's going to be a hard sell in America because we're a response
Yep,
oriented culture rather than a prevention oriented one. No money for prevention, but unlimited response dollars.
yep,
And given that these decisions are made by politicians, uh, who's going to get the more votes? The person who wasted $20 million cleaning up the woods, or who spent the $400 million saving lives in the big fire?
yeah.
So how do we create a situation where um, politicians are rewarded for the decisions that make the biggest difference, not the ones that get the most media attention?
It's a really good question. If I had an immediate answer for that, I would be shouting that from the rooftops. I think it's not just one answer. I think it's a
Yeah.
multifaceted approach to getting that done. Right? It's making sure that we're getting elected officials out there in the field, seeing what we're doing, not only in an active fire space, but rather showing them the benefits of that pre-fire. Being able to quantify the return on investment is also important, right? And so
Yeah.
there's some really neat work called Fuels Treatment Efficacy Monitoring, or FTAM, going on nationwide.
Spell
But
that spell that a little slower for
yeah,
me.
yeah, FTAM, FTEM, Fuels Treatment Efficacy Monitoring. And the goal of this is, okay, so we just got $1 billion kind of down payment with the infrastructure bill to put into pre-fire work. It's a great down payment. It's not going to cover everything, right? That needs to be an ongoing stream of funding if we're serious about putting the kind of money and work on the ground that's going to make that landscape level change, right? And so part of that
Yeah.
is right now, by and large, most programs at the local, state, and I'd even wager federal level wouldn't be able to give you a good idea if the fuels work that we're doing is effective. I mean, that's a wild
Okay.
concept to me, right? And so if you have a congressional district uh, looking or hoping rather to promote that kind of buy-in around the pre-fire work, it's really interesting because we have no way of proving that ROI. And so what fuels
That's right.
efficacy treatment is looking at monitoring, is looking to do that FTAM work, is saying, okay, we're going to put 10 treatments out on the landscape at X amount of dollars. And when a fire tests those fuels treatment areas, we're going to go back and actually do an investigation. Hey, did we change
Yep.
fire behavior? Was this fuels treatment located in a spot where we could leverage it for suppression purposes? Right? And so we're starting to ask these questions. And through these investigations, we're actually able to prove a return on investment. Dana Skelly and
Yeah.
her work with the Joint Fire Science Program is doing, I mean, they're heavy into this work and it's fantastic. If you haven't researched it, Region 6 is really doing, so the states of Oregon and Washington up in the Pacific Northwest are really doing some cool work around that very question. And so,
That's
yeah, how do you prove a negative, right? Law enforcement's very good at it. You can make a direct link of, hey, we put out 10 more cars and crime has dropped 30%. We don't have that same metric available to us as the fire service as the wildfire service to advocate for that kind of investment in pre-fire activity.
not on the pre side anyway, right?
Yep, it's real
If
hard.
you could say, we put 100 more Firehawks in the air and we suppressed the fire
Sure.
30% faster,
Yep.
right?
That's definitely a metric available to you, but the pre-fire, it's real hard to get a handle on some of that same attractive kind of lean behind statistics with your legislators to get them to fund some of that work.
I'm curious. So you've seen, where things were when you jumped into this 12 years ago, where they are now.
Yeah.
Let's look in the future.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think wildland fire response will look like 100 years from now?
Oh boy, 100 years from now, um,
Yep.
I would be disappointed if we weren't at a spot where I had live fire perimeter updates. I want to say almost with no latency, right? So as that fire
Right.
spreads, I'm getting that update on my phone. Or
That could be 10 years, right?
that's the hope. That's what I'm getting at. That's the hope, right?
Yeah.
And I think the way we fundamentally suppress fire changes, and I mean that because how we do it right now is kind of the safest way, right? A term that we use is anchor, flank, and pitch. So I'm going to anchor into a spot that I know is not going to burn, or the fire is not going to burn behind me and endanger me as I'm kind of on this fire suppression mission.
Right.
Flank, we're going to work up the flanks of that fire and pinch. We're going to pinch off the head. All while we're doing that, right, we know that that fire continues to spread. So,
Yes.
and we've got a multiple tools kind of in the toolbox to stop that. We use aircraft, we use, I mean, you name it, we got it, right? And we try to follow that philosophy in our fire suppression. I think in 100 years, that will be an archaic way of going after suppression. I think with that real-time fire capabilities, we're going to know fire intensities real time, and with some of the autonomous fire suppression talk and work that's going on, it's going to be much easier to get that aircraft or those drones, whatever that suppression agent looks like, into the heart of the fire and really cool down and slow down the kind of momentum that builds behind that fire. It creates some weather, right? And it's throwing up those pyrocumulus clouds way up into the atmosphere, really throwing firebrands, spotting, creating those fires that we really truly have issues suppressing, like the Dixie Fire, right? So being able to send suppression resources into the heart of that fire at its hottest point and start cooling a lot of that down, that's going to be game changing. So I think that kind of stuff really is going to revolutionize not just how we suppress fire, but even how we think about fire suppression, right? And tech's not just the answer; it's just going to enable us to look at it a little bit differently, I think.
Right. You can't tell people to eat better, but you can develop, better drugs and better
That's
surgeries
right.
for when they've ruined their bodies, right?
That's right.
Yeah. It is the same issue. Well, I'm literally betting my house on, on autonomous suppression. Team Wildfire, we're developing jet engine enabled, vehicles that you can put them at the head of the fire and literally push back,
Sure.
with hurricane force winds and drive those fires back. Because, it seems like attacking a fire from the face makes more sense, if you're not worried about dying.
You're
Right.
exactly right. Right. That's the thing where we
Right.
traditionally haven't.
Own the wind, own the fire is essentially,
Sure.
my concept, right? Is that
Yeah.
the wind decides where the fire goes and everyone else plays catch up.
Yep.
And that if you could own the wind, you could be the dominant force in any subclimate, around the fire.
Yeah. 100% right. It's the same
So
philosophy. Technology is going to enable us to change how we think about that fire suppression overall moving forward.
yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's why it's really exciting.
I understand why you talk so fast now, because you're like so excited about all the things that you're working on, and I love that. Because you see all the different, all the moving pieces. You've played in everybody's sandbox. Now you're watching them all, and you're helping them play together better. And I think that's really the solution, right? Is going to be sharing information between departments, between agencies, between countries, between universities, and I suspect that the knowledge base already exists. It's just siloed right now. But if we put all the smart people in one room, we could do a lot better than we're doing now.
Yeah, that's 100%. A lot of the things we discussed today, location sharing, tracking of firefighters in disconnected environments, a lot of that's not rocket science. Right? A lot of the technology
Right.
exists today. It's just being able to make those connections and kind of connect the folks that need to be connected to make those decisions to implement some of that technology.
Yeah, right. You could save as many lives with the right email to the right person as with the right new technology.
Pretty
Right?
crazy to think about, but yeah.
Yeah, it's really true. Anthony, anything else you want to tell me about Esri? Any new directions, things that we should watch for?
Yeah, I would say we're really trying to make an investment in that pre-fire space, right? We highlighted a lot of the need and through the infrastructure down payment and some of the fuels treatment efficacy monitoring work that's going on across the country. And part of that is getting communities together to plan. And so to put our best foot forward in that space, we've come out with a community wildfire planning template, or a CWPP template. It's based on ArcGIS Hub, and for sake of time, you can think of Hub as a bit of a geo-enabled website. We're able to take a lot of the data, maps,
Okay.
apps that you already have created within your organization and put them or display them rather in a manner that meets the intent of what a CWPP should be. And so when you bring community members together and you have a goal about planning around wildfire resiliency for a given area, you're really able to allow the public and those stakeholders to interrogate that information ask intelligent
Yes.
questions, and trying to move from these plans that are traditionally have been a three-ring binder that sits on a desk, collects dust,
Yep.
ends up being a paperweight, moving it to something that's a little bit more useful and attractive for people to kind of investigate on their own and draw their own insights and conclusions from. So that's my hope, and yeah, look for that.
And I guess in your process, a certain amount of destructive fire um, is helpful because without the example of what goes wrong, people aren't willing to do what makes things go right.
100%.
Right.
It's the never waste a good disaster, right? That's a little dark, but people's attention spans are short, and so making
It's
hay
true.
while the sun's up's definitely key to success there.
Yeah, I can see from my window, I can see, some of the burn scars still from the Marshall Fire.
Yeah,
And
unfortunate.
yeah, and then that was an area where, what do you mean? It's the suburbs. There's a car dealership and a hotel. We're not in the middle of the mountains. And so things like that really, change people's mindsets for the better to realize, you're vulnerable no matter where you are. Given the right wind conditions, any neighborhood becomes a set of trees.
You are 100% correct, and we've got to start looking at even human development on the landscape as an unhealthy forest. Is kind of the transition I've made in my own mind, right? Where building density, it just promotes home to home ignition. And so, what do we do in the forest when that happens? Well, we do fuels reduction projects. We don't have the same luxury
Right.
on the structure side, right? After the built environment's
Home
already there.
reduction.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, right.
right. But we do have the chance to regulate how that looks moving forward for new developed areas, that kind of thing. So, getting the right policies in place and building codes in place is kind of paramount. And I'm always reminded of um, the Great Fires in San Francisco and Chicago, where we razed entire cities to the ground. Well, what did we come up with? We had building codes, right? Guess what
Right.
rarely happens anymore? That kind of city ending structure fire generating from that structure. What does happen, unfortunately, is just like you mentioned, right? We're not traditionally in what we would think is a wildland area. And
Yep.
so, as such, we might not have adopted the kind of building and WUI codes that may have been beneficial to preventing that kind of structure to structure spread. So, yeah, we'll see where we end up with that.
Fascinating. Anthony, I could go on with you indefinitely, and I hope you'll come back and join me again on the fire break because I know you've got a lot more to add to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for
But
having us. I really appreciate it, Steve.
yeah, hey, absolutely. Thank you so much, Anthony Schultz from Esri, which formerly ESRI. In the spirit of Prince, right?
That's right.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. You guys are listening to The Fire Break, sponsored by Team Wildfire, and I hope you'll join me back here on our next episode.